Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential because when you keep growing, we all get stronger. And we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to the Peak Physique Podcast with Andre Adams on the NASM Podcast Network.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. You're tuned into the Peak Physique Podcast. I'm your host, Andre Adams, NASM Master Trainer and IFBB Physique Olympian. And today I've got a very special treat for you guys. And we're going to talk about testosterone benefits for females in bodybuilding. And I think this is an exciting concept right now, right? We're going to highlight the role and importance of managing testosterone levels, define what those levels should even be for day-to-day health, as well as maximizing or optimizing physical performance for the female athletes. And as you guys know, if you've been keeping up with the 2024 Olympics, it's highly controversial right now, right? You've had the Olympic boxer Imane Khalif, who genetically just has high testosterone, right? Her body produces more testosterone than estrogen, which gives her a bit of a dominance there. So there's a lot of questions circulating about what should the female athlete's testosterone be, and does that give them more leverage or more of an advantage compared to kind of baseline or homeostasis levels for the average athlete? So we're going to debunk some of those common misconceptions. I'm also going to break down concepts like interpreting female blood work, right? What should those baseline hormones look like? And then what are those optimal ranges and hormone ratios that we generally look for with testosterone to maximize performance and then just overall quality of life and well-being. Let's go ahead and dive in. So I'm going to start by defining what does testosterone do in the body and why is it beneficial for everyone, male or female. Testosterone, obviously a hormone that's naturally produced in the body. For females, that's going to be produced primarily in the adrenals and the ovaries in small amounts when comparing to their male counterparts. But it can affect a lot of different functions within the body, such as body composition, energy and focus, mood, libido, strength, sleep, right? Overall performance, even depression, anxiety, and just overall well-being, right? When those hormones are out of balance, it can affect every single one of these attributes. Now, when it comes to specific to physique athletes, bodybuilding athletes, two of the most critical things that the testosterone is going to impact within the female body, it directly impacts the ability to build skeletal muscle tissue. Obviously, for bodybuilding, that kind of defines or sums up the goal, right? We need to build muscle tissue. So if those testosterone levels in the female are suboptimal, they're subclinical, then that could inhibit their ability to put on the amount of muscle density required to perform well at a high level in bodybuilding. Now, the second one that goes hand in hand with that is it directly impacts the ability to lose fat. Again, in bodybuilding, it's all about, conditioning. What we refer to as conditioning is really just meeting the criteria for each division in terms of body composition, right? So that's going to be your low percent body fat, higher amount of skeletal muscle, and then that muscle to fat ratio. Now, testosterone is one of the primary drivers for that. And it's one of the first places we like to start looking when we're talking about optimizing a physique. Second thing we're going to cover is why is it considered taboo? And why is it so misunderstood, especially for females, not just in the sport of bodybuilding, but in general, right? If you ask 90% of the population, walk around your gym and ask about testosterone for females, and most people would misinterpret that as a male hormone. And reality, right, everyone produces testosterone, and it's really just a misconception about how much or, it being a male hormone. But the reality is females do need and produce testosterone, and we need to keep them in optimal clinical levels of testosterone. Now, some of the things that give it such a bad or taboo, in the sport of bodybuilding, is really going to be abuse, right? So there's going to be clearly in many different sports, there's going to be times where things like testosterone or other forms of like dihydrotestosterone, right, DHT, or we would refer to that as anabolic androgenic steroids or AAS. These things get abused in sports. And when we say abused, we're talking about self-prescribed in high dosages or multiple compounds for long durations, not under medical supervision, right? And these are the things that can lead to different side effects. In women, that would be things like virilization or the masculinization effects that we try to avoid, right? We certainly don't want any of those things happening to our female athletes. But that's one of the things that can obviously give it a bad reputation. But the reality is that those are generally due to super physiological dosages and states of hormones in the body versus bringing an athlete to their homeostasis levels, their baseline levels that their body should be producing for the general population. And again, just high doses, self-prescription, not under medical supervision, and then cycling with multiple compounds for long durations. Those are the things that generally give it a bad reputation that we're having this episode right here to try and break down and debunk some of that. So we talked a little bit about how testosterone can directly impact a physique, and we're going to go a little bit deeper, right? So how does the testosterone level in the body directly impact the female athlete's physique, health, and overall performance outcomes? Well, it's going to improve the ability to build muscle, right? We talked about that. And that's something that kind of depends on your genetics, your coaching strategy, your existing fitness experience level, but that can directly impact your ability to build quality muscle density. And depending on the division that they're competing, if we're talking about a bikini athlete versus a women's physique or women's bodybuilding athlete, those are going to be two completely different discussions. And the requirements of the training, supplementation, the dieting are going to vary quite significantly there, right? Because there's different goals and different outcomes that are trying to be achieved with a much stronger adaptation for the female bodybuilder compared to the bikini athlete. But testosterone plays a critical role in that and should be the foundation of achieving that level of muscle density. The next thing is increased muscle nitrogen. That's a big one, right? That's going to contribute to things like faster recovery, greater strength, more muscle fullness, better pumps in the gym. So increased muscle nitrogen certainly plays a significant role in even muscle protein synthesis, right? If you guys haven't caught our episode on muscle protein synthesis here on the podcast, highly encourage you to go back and watch that, and you'll have a better understanding of how things like testosterone might amplify some of those effects as well. Another one would be increased recovery, right? So it's going to improve the ability for the body to recover. I've talked in the past about the SRA curve. That's your stimulus, recovery, adaptation curve. And when we can speed that process up, that means that we've got some exercise-induced muscle damage, right? We're putting that stimulus on the body, breaking down muscle tissue. And if we can recover faster and adapt stronger, that means more sessions in the gym per week, maybe longer or higher intensity sessions in the gym per week. And ultimately, you're going to have a more successful prep and build more muscle. It improves the ability to burn body fat, which is going to play a very significant role in your recomp, or I like to call it the core cutting phase. That's, those final 12 to 14 weeks of contest prep. When we're dialing down into a show, it's going to help you burn more body fat while retaining your muscle when your testosterone is at optimal levels. And we're going to break those two things apart as we continue to work through this episode of optimal. We'll call that physiological state of testosterone versus super physiological, which is exogenous hormones that are dosing above and beyond what we would call homeostasis. So we're going to keep those two things separate in this discussion. And then the last one, really when we're talking about benefits or how it could impact the female physique, you're also going to notice an anti-fatigue benefit, right? So improved energy and focus. And honestly, that can also impact an athlete's mental, or, we'll call it mental health or cognitive function. When you feel better, you've got a little more energy, you're able to concentrate and focus and get all your other day-to-day tasks done in addition to your training, you're always going to perform better, right? When you feel extremely chronically fatigued, you feel sluggish, you don't feel like yourself, you feel a little bit, depressed or high anxiety, those things are always going to take away from you reaching your potential or maximizing your potential. So many different benefits and ways that testosterone can impact the female physique. But I think more commonly people are accustomed to just thinking about strength or muscle size, hypertrophy. Now, one thing I want to touch on when we're talking testosterone for females, and honestly, this applies to males as well. What I see in the industry very often is people that are starting to coach athletes that do decide to self-prescribe, right? They do decide to use exogenous hormones, be it injectable therapies or oral compounds. And generally, I like to say that testosterone is going to be a much safer alternative than starting any athlete with AAS or, other compounds. Now, the reason that we do that, if you think about this, what should be your first goal as a contest prep coach or as an athlete is to maximize your natural performance. You need at least several years of strict dieting, training, proper coaching, consistency to really maximize your body's potential and find out genetically where your strengths and your weaknesses are, where your limitations are, and really just build that foundation of muscle. Now, from there, right, you can start with all the non-AAS type of supplementation. So when we're talking things like building muscle, the over-the-counter stuff like creatine, essential amino acids, having an isolate, a whey isolate post-workout to spike your muscle protein synthesis. Go back again, watch our, optimal pre-interim post-workout supplementation guide, right? There's going to be a lot of natural tools that you can employ to build that foundation of muscle. Then the next thing we like to do is establish baselines, and we'll talk a little bit more about this shortly, but we like to get the blood work done and see where your levels are at naturally. And if we see that there's some deficiencies, you've got subclinical levels of testosterone, if it's a female athlete, we want to see them generally, let's say 50 to 75 nanogram per deciliter, and their blood work comes back and they have 15 nanograms of testosterone, right? Pretty obvious low-hanging fruit where we can look at what our choices, our options are to bring that athlete back to physiological state. So these are some of the reasons that testosterone is safer, but in addition to that, testosterone is naturally produced in the body. So it's always going to synthesize and metabolize a lot better, a lot easier than adding some exogenous hormones or compounds that are not produced in the body. So if we think about some of the common substances that we see abused in bodybuilding, such as Anavar or Primobolan, Masteron, right? If we think about comparing that to testosterone, what's the potential upside to testosterone? Well, again, it's naturally occurring in the body. We have very well-defined blood labs and blood tests. We have tightly defined ranges that we want to see physiological states of testosterone. It's easy to test, right? You can go get your blood work drawn. It's maybe $15 to add on your testosterone lab. And these are things that we can easily monitor to regulate an athlete or just a lifestyle client within that, that optimal physiological range. Versus if we talk about something like an oral steroid like Anavar, that's not produced in the body. There's no test. There's no optimal range that you should be in, right? So there's a bit of trial and error and a bit of a guessing game involved in that, as opposed to just optimizing your testosterone, and then taking it from there, right? There's times and places for everything, but this is where we like to start. It's a lot safer and it's going to be a lot more effective. If you guys are just joining us today on the Peak Physique Podcast, we are talking about we'll talk about testosterone 101, right? Benefits for female athletes. And we're breaking down some of these concepts. And I want to go a little bit deeper here. So we've covered why testosterone is important. What does it do in the female body? How did it get considered taboo, right? Some of those misconceptions. And why testosterone can be safer than alternative exogenous hormones. From there, I want to touch on some options, right? What are the options? So when we have an athlete or we have an aging athlete that is a candidate for potential HRT, right? Hormone replacement therapy. What are the different options to get that athlete's testosterone back into check? Well, you got a few, right? Obviously, we can start with if you've got an athlete that's very close to range, but just a little bit deficient. They're a little bit subclinical or suboptimal. They could start with something like a natural test booster. Like First Form has a really good stack, the Primal Pack. We actually sell a lot of those at our nutrition store, C2, and that one's very effective too. We've actually tested that one before and after with many of our clients, where we do their blood work, and then 6 to 8 weeks later, we redo their blood work. And we generally see a 40 to 50% increase over their baseline over that time span using the natural testosterone boosters. Now, the issue could be there if you're so low that, okay, you get a 50% bump, but what if your 50% is only 50% of 10 nanogram per deciliter? Well, now you're 15, right? And you need to be 50 to 75. So there's going to be a time and a place for that. Now, when you've got a more severe deficiency and we need to correct those faster, then, if you're working with a medical office or you're working with the endocrinologist, then you're looking at different options like pellets and daily creams, injections, etc. And we'll kind of highlight those very quickly here. I'm not a huge fan personally of the pellets for women HRT. I've had a few clients that went that route, and the pellets are inserted into the body and they last several months, but what you get is this really kind of hard to manage curve of testosterone in the body. So as that hormone is released over time, it's not a smooth linear curve, and you start to get this big ramp up. This peak puts you at a little bit higher risk for some of the side effects during that peak, and then you get this drop off, right? And then generally they don't feel very good for a few weeks out of that process. So a little bit more volatile, right? A little bit lumpy with the hormone curve. Not a huge fan of pellets. Daily creams can be effective, right? Those would be like a dermal cream that you apply topically. The one issue I'll say is that you have to do it every day. So that can be a little bit overwhelming for some. And then, if you're a mother, you're nursing, you got small children, you don't really want that to get onto the children and things like this. So there's, other issues with the dermal creams. But again, it's a tool for some people that might make the most sense. And then you've got probably the preferred method, which would be injection. Now, this can be intramuscular or it could be subcutaneous. For females, since it's such a small dosage, and we'll talk about those starting dosages that are typically recommended by an endocrinologist or HRT doctor, such a tiny amount, most females choose to just do a sub-Q with an insulin syringe. So that's kind of where the medical provider will help guide you, retest 6 to 8 weeks. But as a contest prep coach, you do need to be very well versed, right? You need to stay within your boundaries as a coach, not a medical professional, but you certainly need to understand these concepts so that you can identify when an athlete might be a candidate for HRT, or they're having different issues happening in the body that are affecting their physique outcomes, so that you can refer them to the proper medical team. Now, let's talk about some risks and barriers, right? We briefly touched on when abused in high dosages, so super physiological dosages of exogenous testosterone for very long durations, it could put an athlete at risk for virilization or masculine effects. Now, there's some studies that have taken place. There's one in 2010 by Trace, and that one was done on, I believe, people, so women that had been taking higher doses of testosterone ranging anywhere from 6 months up to 4 years. And they monitored some of the, the side effects of those super physiological dosages over that extended period of time. And the studies actually show very minimal virilization effects. But again, this varied by the individual, and that's the key. Everyone's sensitivity to androgens and compounds is going to be different. And if you're a contest prep coach or an athlete, you're probably very well familiar with that already. But that's one thing, is this can't be cookie cutter. You do have to have a constant feedback loop with your athletes and your medical team, and make sure that you're constantly monitoring blood work and monitoring also just for that feedback loop. If there's any side effects or any other issues going on, those are things you want to address. So that's one of the risks and barriers for high dosages for long durations. There are, however, no increased risk of cardiovascular disease, breast cancer, hepatotoxicity with the liver. So compared to oral anabolics, the injectable testosterone actually bypasses the liver, so you don't have the issues with hepatotoxicity. So in your blood work, you'd be looking at two values, AST and ALT, which are your liver enzymes, often going to be elevated whenever there's oral supplementation involving that first pass through the liver. So that's one benefit of doing testosterone therapy, injectable, compared to the orals. And then we've got potential risk for what we would call androgenic or even DHT side effects, right? So things that we would want to monitor for regularly with that weekly feedback loop or athlete check-ins would be any noticeable changes in body hair or acne, any voice changes. There's voice frequency apps that you can use for your female competitors to monitor their trend over time to see if that frequency is stable or if it's starting to get lower. These could be the indication of the onset of androgenic side effects. But even other things that are less comfortable to talk about, clitoral enlargement or sensitivity, right? There's other things that should be monitored and, again, adjusted based on some of that feedback from the athlete. Now, when physiological dosages were deployed in those studies, there really weren't any side effects, any significant side effects reported for those athletes using HRT, keeping them within normal physiological state of testosterone. So when we talk about, they generally say for the average population, 40 to 60 nanogram per deciliter. For females, we like to say 50 to 75, with a max of 100 nanogram per deciliter for physique athletes. And again, over that, those that were using it for 6 months to 4 years, minimal reported side effects in that 2010 study by Trish. And just to give you guys some reference ranges, when we look at female physiological dosages, so a candidate for HRT, let's say this female athlete's testosterone and her blood work comes back and it's at 18, right? So suboptimal. Just for general quality of life, we want her to be over 40, right? Any medical professional is going to tell her that. Now, the starting dosage is generally going to be 3 milligrams of testosterone cypionate or enanthate per week. And again, I like to say sub-Q for these small dosages. It's even more optimal to break that apart, if possible, into micro doses several times throughout the week to stabilize the curve, stabilize the hormones. And to put that into perspective, one of the other misconceptions is, oh my God, I'm going to turn into a man, right? No, we're keeping you at physiological states that your body is supposed to be at. And again, 3 milligrams per week would be the supplementation, no more than 12.5 milligrams if we need to titrate that up over time. Now, for female to male gender reassignment, just to give you guys some reference ranges, a medical doctor, hormone doctor would generally start these individuals at 50 to 100 milligrams per week, every week. So 50 to 100 milligrams per week compared to 3 milligrams per week, right? So you're talking over 30 times the dosage that a female client or competitor would be using to stabilize within those physiological ranges. So just to give you guys some reference ranges, I think that helps kind of paint the picture on what's the spectrum that we're looking at here compared to something like a male or a gender reassignment hormone protocol. And there's a massive gap, massive difference between those two. Now, interpretation of labs. This is going to be critical for all you physique coaches and athletes out there. And we're not going to go through full blood work. We're only looking at testosterone here. And then I'll give a quick blurb on the ratios that I like to see for progesterone and estrogen or estradiol, right? E2 in the blood work. For testosterone, anything that's less than 40 nanograms per deciliter, I would consider improving that athlete up to that 50 to 75 nanogram level with a maximum of 100. Now you'll get some, in some cases, individuals that might creep up above 100 for different divisions, let's say women's physique or women's bodybuilding, and they're okay with that. They have a high androgen tolerance. They're not experiencing any sides. But on average, 50 to 75 for physiological state. They're going to have a better quality of life. They're going to feel better in their day-to-day lifestyle activities. And then, of course, just from a performance standpoint, again, they're going to build more muscle. It's going to be a lot easier for them on prep to get in shape. So 50 to 75, up to a maximum of 100 nanogram per deciliter. Now, the other value that we like to check when we're talking about testosterone in particular is free testosterone. So when we give that range, that 50 to 75, that's total. Now, you could run into an issue where sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG, is too high, which means that the testosterone, the serum testosterone in the body, is all bound. And when it's bound, that means that it's not bioavailable for use in the body. So then we have to look at different things to increase their free testosterone. You know, if you do it naturally, you're going to be looking at obviously balancing their diet. So you want to eliminate things like alcohol, make sure you're optimizing their macronutrient profile. You want to make sure that they're exercising regularly, which as a physique athlete, you're probably already doing that. And then the natural test boosters we talked about, right? So when we think about the first form stack, some of the main ingredients there would be things like fenugreek. You're going to have some tribulus terrestris. You're going to have D-aspartic acid and a few other pretty potent ingredients in there that help stimulate the process, right? So there's going to be more production of testosterone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone as part of that process. Now, if it's an exogenous hormone and you need something a little bit more aggressive, then there's medications such as Proviron or other things that are going to increase the amount of free testosterone in the body, right? So those are the options, but those are the two values in the blood labs that we like to look at: total testosterone, and then making sure that free testosterone is in a normal, healthy range, and we don't have any outliers in the labs. And just a quick point on the progesterone and estrogen, since we are overall looking to balance and optimize the ratio for female athletes that don't have any issues with hypothalamic amenorrhea, where they're 3 or 4 months of missed periods. For those that are menstruating regularly, we like to say 7 days before their next expected period or 21 days after day 1 of the last period. That's when we like to pull the labs. Now, that's going to give us a good snapshot as we see that progesterone curve cross pass with their E2 or estradiol curve, and then we've got their testosterone within that range. So we like to say 50 to 75 for testosterone, and then progesterone 4 to 23 nanogram per deciliter, and then estradiol is going to be 40 to 230 nanogram per deciliter. Now, if you notice, there's a 10-to-1 ratio between that E2 value and the progesterone value, and that's about the range that we like to see our athletes in during contest prep. Now, if any of those ratios between those three hormones are off, then you have something actionable to address as a coach, or if you need to refer out to a medical partner, then that's your signal, right? Now you have an understanding of the blood work. And then the last thing I'll leave you guys with here for the female testosterone is really just guidance on how to coach athletes that are on HRT, or ones that are considering, or maybe they're a candidate that needs HRT. Now, you're going to have some that come to you that are already using exogenous hormones, maybe from a previous coach, maybe it's self-prescribed, but unfortunately, this is going to be a very common thing you run into, and you're going to have to understand how to navigate this as a contest prep coach in a safe and effective manner. And again, I highly recommend establishing a solid network of medical professionals to help you with this process, right? Work with the medical professionals, establish baselines with blood work always. It's actually mandatory for Team Adams Prep. When we take on new athletes, they have to undergo their blood work, even our natural athletes, because there's all kinds of hormones that we're looking for, including other things like IGF-1, thyroid function, and then, all their biometrics and key health indicators. So you should always be starting with that. The next step is determining individual needs of the athlete based on their labs. So we're kind of doing a needs analysis. Maybe we need to do some mineral rebalancing. Maybe we need to add in or modify their regular daily health supplements to address some of these imbalances in the body. And then if those athletes are candidates or are already using testosterone therapy, that starting dosage is typically advised at 3 milligrams per week, subcutaneous, could also be intramuscular. And then again, we can titrate that up over time to 12.5 milligrams per week, depending on the athlete's response and sensitivity to the testosterone, until you get them in that physiological state wherein then we would drop down to maintenance or potentially pull it all together and maintain those levels with the natural test boosters. More frequent microdosing, as we discussed, is always going to be beneficial just to stabilize and balance those hormones over time. And then updated blood labs every 6 to 8 weeks, right? Without the blood work, it's almost like closing your eyes, playing darts, and just throwing at a random target that you can't see. You really need the blood work to be able to identify this tight range that you're trying to get them in to optimize their health. And then we want to hold them there, right? We don't want to go above into this super physiological state. We want to keep them at optimal homeostasis levels. We talked about titrating the dosage up until stabilized within range and then shifting into that maintenance plan. And then also really just making sure that you're also looking at the relative ratios of their progesterone and estrogens. And I'll also put DHES in there as well to make sure that all of these hormones are balanced and in a physiological norm, right? So that we're improving their performance, but also their overall quality of life and the way that they look and feel. Guys, that's all I have for you today on female hormones. Hopefully you learned something new on testosterone for female athletes. And this discussion, honestly, there's so many acute and specific questions that come up on a weekly basis. I'm always more than happy to answer those. Definitely reach out to me either via email or on Instagram. You can contact me on email at trainingbydre@gmail.com, or on Instagram, it's going to be at AndreAdams_official. And then, of course, my website, AndreAdamsofficial.com, is where you can find me. And I also want to mention for you guys that are following, there you have your chance to actually come meet myself in person, as well as 8-time Mr. Olympia Ronnie Coleman, 4-time, soon to be 5-time Miss Olympia Andrea Shaw, and a host of many different sponsors and vendors like Young LA, Angel Competition Bikini, and so many more. We have a huge event going down right here at my gym in Kenosha, Wisconsin, December 7th. So if you go to the website, the AndreAdamsofficial.com, you'll get all the information. We're going to be doing a huge in-person seminar talking about all of these amazing concepts you're hearing right here on the Peak Physique Podcast. All right, guys, I will see you next week on the Peak Physique Podcast. Signing off.